timer to be screenshot. We're just waiting for the timer to be screenshot, and then we can begin.
Hi, we'll be sharing a timer soon. Just give us a minute.
Okay. I think it's already. Okay, I think I see the timer right now. Can I confirm with the audience as well if the timer is visible? Or the speakers rather. Okay. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. All right. I think the timer should be visible to everyone. Okay. I guess we could begin. Hi everyone. Welcome to the Open Grand Finals of this year's RBPD. Congratulations to all teams for making it this far. My name is Paolo. I'm going to be your chair for today. My pronouns are he or they, although I prefer if you refer to me or anyone in the panel as just simply the panel. There are 4 other people with me in the panel if they wish to introduce themselves in the order by which they appear on the tab, starting with Anupriya.
Hi everyone, Anupriya, preferred pronoun she, they, panelist for the grand final. All the very best. Would request if you refer to the panel as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, hi Oli, all the best.
Hi Rushdoon, he good luck.
Hi everyone, Sourav this side. Good luck.
Okay. So debating on the motion, this House supports making climate migrants eligible for asylum. Opening government, we have Khalsa A. Opening op, we have Gooners B. Closing gov, we have We Fear the Landlady. And in closing op, we have 100 LA 1 kilo X IITB. If there are no other concerns, and I presume that everyone is still here, we can start the debate. Prime Minister, whenever you're ready.
Could you please shift it to a stopwatch if that's possible? Thank you so much. Before I start, a couple of shout outs. First, to the organization committee. It was a really fun comp and really good motions we had. And then thank you for running the comp on time. Second, to my teammate Abhivir, thank you for being such a great team. Yeah, also my juniors, Mridul, they broke first breaking novice team at SAS. Really proud of you guys. Cool. Starting my speech in the reverse count of 3, 2, 1, and go. Panel, climate change is also a form of violence that is inflicted upon these people who are living in underdeveloped nations and disenfranchised communities. This violence looks like in 3 different forms. First, note when any climate crisis happens, the first thing that happens within your community is loss of housing, loss of residential areas, loss of basic livelihood, things like shelter, things like basic food amenities, things like basic aid corridors get destroyed by cyclones, by tornadoes, by heavy rains, by storms. Secondly, you lose jobs, you lose educations, and you lose healthcare. You lose accessibility to these areas because roads get destroyed, transportation systems get destroyed. But secondly, the infrastructure that provide you education, etc., also get destroyed. But thirdly, because these countries have to heavily invest in then rapidly going in and making shelters, etc., they are not able to focus on long-term development of the country. But thirdly, note huge amounts of physical violence and huge amounts of mental trauma is inflicted upon these people. They have to see their father die in front of them. They have to see their child get flown in the ocean water because of the breakdown of the dam in their local river. They have to see their house get destroyed in front of their eyes, their wife being lost in front of them, their cattle dying. It's huge amount of psychological trauma, and they also have to face huge amounts of physical injuries. We believe that climate issues are also a legitimate form of violence on these people. But secondly, note that people who become climate refugees at the very first place are the ones who do it in the worst possible instances. which means just
Sorry,
because
the
some
current
rain happened in
speaker.
my country, I don't leave my country because I'm attached
Anju
to my
can answer
community.
that.
I have
Okay.
instances
I paused
when
the
climate
timer
change is
at
happening.
1 minute and 46
Hello,
seconds.
hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're totally audible. Sorry, what happened?
I can't hear Kinshuk at the moment. Did they disconnect?
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, but on my end, it's saying that your network bandwidth is low. Is there any way by which you can fix that? Because I think you cut off.
Just a second. Just give me a second. Is it
Okay.
better now?
Um, it's still a bit crackly, but I can hear you. With the panel, is this okay, or um do we need to adjust a bit more?
Can you speak the motion? Like, can you just read it out?
Just a second. I hope I am audible right now. This house supports climate refugees getting asylum.
Yeah, I mean, I'm able to hear him.
Okay, I'm
Oh,
also able
I
to hear
think there
you.
was a bit of glitching at like 143. That's what the OC texted me about. Let's just wait till 143 on the stopwatch and then they can continue. Is that okay?
Yeah, that should be fine. On
Cool.
my end, it's 146, but I think 143 might be more accurate.
Okay, fair.
By the way, for the current speaker, the last thing that I heard from you is that you were ending your point about climate change causing violence and trauma.
cool, cool. I'll wait till 145 and then I'll stop.
Wait, I mean, you don't need to wait until then. Like, we can just restart the timer and we can make up the remaining time.
Yeah, or I
Sure.
can just like put. Yeah, cool. That also works.
Yeah, worst case, I still have like the original time on my phone, so if ever, I'll try my best to like put the timestamp. But yeah,
Sure. So I think I have 5 minutes, 30 seconds left. I'll stop at that. We can restart.
okay.
Cool. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. So till now I have explained that why climate change causes huge amounts of violence on these people. And secondly, you choose to become a climate migrant only in the worst instances of climate change that are being done and inflicted upon you. Because obviously there is aversion to move out of your local communities. You don't want to leave your country. There is some amount of risk associated with leaving, etc. That you do it when the climate change is being manifested in the worst possible ways within your country, and you have no recourse so as forth within your own country to provide to you and keep you safe. The second thing I want to prove is that why these developed nations and Western liberal democracies have specific obligations towards these climate migrants to accept them and give them a legitimate status as asylum seeker. Two reasons for that. First, we believe that historically corporations and governments of Western liberal democracies were the ones who caused industrial revolution to happen. That caused the major amounts of pollution and major amounts of climate crisis that we witness within the current status quo. But the second, note that the appropriate amount of aid that should have been given by Western nations, an appropriate amount of institutional knowledge that should have been imparted within these developing nations to solve their climate crisis hasn't happened yet. So either Western democracies have to give that aid and facilitate mitigatory measures and preventive measures to solve these climate change effects within these developing nations, or till the time they are not able to do so, at least accept these refugees and give them a legitimate legal status within these nations. The third thing I want to do is what on the comparative happens with these people's life. Note when they get a legitimate status to live within other countries and other better nations within better situations, two things happen. First, they are given basic amount of community support and basic amount of facilitation to develop their capacities. This looks like their children getting basic amount of education, or they getting some basic amount of healthcare, some basic amount of livelihood, and some basic amount of jobs. But secondly, note we are fine with sending these people back when within these nations the conditions have been restored, or within these nations international organizations and Western liberal democracies have facilitated preventive changes and climate change crisis have been solved in these nations, which means these are temporary in nature, and we are willing to send them back when conditions get solved within their nations. The third thing is, why do we need to make them eligible? Four impacts on that. First, a lot of less people die, because when they have a legal security, for sure you are going to migrate, and then a lot less people die within these like undignified way due to climate crisis. Secondly, note on their side of the paradigm also, some people are likely to migrate in these Western democracies or within other nations. The difference is they would not have that legal status and legal recognition. The harm of not having legal status and legal recognition is twofold. First, you don't give them legal recourse when they face abuse within these particular nations. Secondly, they're always threatened by police, being by any day police can come and knock my door and send me back and deport me back to my country, and I have no legal recourse regarding that. But thirdly, they're able to live a way better, freer life, way more dignified life, when they have access to better targeted care because they have a legal status and you can better locate them. But secondly, they are not prone to huge amounts of abuses when they have legal status and legal resource at the very first place. The last thing I want to do in my speech is prove that why, even if they stay within these nations, the last thing I want to do is that even if they stay within these nations, why their lives is worse off. Note, when they stay within these nations or where climate crisis has happened, their ability to live a well-off life is way less, meaning that they also lack huge amounts of resources, which means they are way more prone to go ahead and enter gangs and criminal violences. But secondly, they are way more likely to destabilize their country out of desperation. Before that, POI.
By your logic, all of the kind of trauma that you claim from climate can be happening in another condition through worse political leaders or stuff like that. Why do you not allow refugees in that case? Why do you just not open all borders if all you care about is better life? There is a lot of political.
Sure, we are willing to do that. I don't have any problem with political refugees also getting a place. The debate is about this particular group is vulnerable, and because they were vulnerable to a certain degree because of these Western developed nations, we believe that they also deserve a status and a shot at getting a place within these nations and get their life better. Note that these people are increasingly getting vulnerable because climate change is getting increasingly worse, and solvency to that is not quite achievable by humans in current status quo. You have negative feedback loops getting worse, ice caps melting daily, meaning that at any point in time, the scale at which this migration is likely to happen is also increasing, and the vulnerability of these people is also likely to increase, meaning that you, especially at this point in time, have to give them a legal recourse, have to give them a shot at entering these countries so that they can live a better and dignified life and don't die proud.
Okay, we thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Moving on to the Leader of Opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm just gonna go set up a timer. Yeah, all that type of stuff. So, yeah, hold on. I have a timer now. Okay, I'll just start whenever I'm ready, but like, yeah, wait, I should go on with like my shout outs. Okay. Firstly, shout out to my institution for being here with me. Joseph, Hasaya, you guys didn't break, so this one's for you guys. Yippee! Secondly, shout out to my friends who are watching this, specifically Cam Soph Book Club, Geoff, Zoe, even if you guys don't check the GC, Yakov, Regina, Kim, Nino, Sab, and Sophia. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you all for supporting me on a random tournament that I joined on a whim. Thirdly, shout out to Miguel for pulling me in this tournament, even if I have midterms literally at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. You make it worth it. Lastly, shout out to yeah, just the people and just someone who made me realize how beautiful debating is. You're not here to see it, but everyone should know. Awesome. I would have quit after PSCC, but look, we're here now, and I'm happy for that. Okay, cool. Starting my speech then. Oof. Starting my speech then in 3, 2, 1. What we champion on opposition is accountability. Principles only fly insofar that your impacts actually work, and that is going to be it is going to be the heart of opening opposition's case, as clear as LO. But then I want to really frame this debate really hard because I think that's what Prime Minister failed to do. What is the point of asylum in the first place? Oh, also just keep in mind that this is this House supports motion, which means that government literally has fiat, right? But then that also means we're able to criticize that fiat and explain why it doesn't work in the first place, right? But then okay, just continuing on with my frame then. What is the point of asylum? The entire point of asylum in the first place is to be able is the most humanitarian route. However, the cost of having an asylum is that you're going to have to burden other countries into being able to agree with it, right? Which means that in this kind of world, right? Let's say for example that you're that like let's just picture for example that the Californian wildfires. Let's assume that these people were able to seek asylum to like go to the east or whatever. That would probably mean a lot. That would probably mean, granted their conditions and granted Prime Minister's framing, that these people would have to go to the east and have to be able to be actively accepted into kind of society. This is going to lead to a lot more impacts. Just wait for them, right? But then secondly, the point of asylum is to make sure that this is going to be a long-term solution. It means that the people that live here are probably expected to be rehabilitated and accepted into society, which means that they have to find jobs, which means that they have to contribute to the economy, which means that they have to live out as citizen in these kind of things, right? But then okay, what is the standard of being a climate migrant in the first place? I think one, it's just generally being displaced by environmental change, for example, like the Italian earthquakes. But then secondly, what differs from military or war migrants versus climate migrants? One, most of these like military migrants are forcibly kicked out, but the matter of fact here is that the fact that they're kicked out, they're all given like political conditions, right? They're expected to return after a long time, right? This is incredibly important later. But then secondly, the way climate migrants work, right, is that simply at the point in which you realize that your country is fucked and there's so much fires and oh my god, I can't live in this heat anymore. That's the point in which you realize that there's no incentive to get back if it can't get better, and this is definitely just going to harm the country even more, right? Okay, but then I want to be really clear here on what the case is going to be. I think this is going to lean more towards climate doomerism, and we think that this is bad. But before that, I want to give out to my responses on PM, right? The harm of damaged infrastructure is going to be symmetric, but the entire point of this debate is to be able to explain how we deal with it better. On government side, you allow them to fuck off to another country, and you burden other countries in the process, and you have to make sure that you're going to be totally okay with the cost of having so much more migrants in these kinds of extreme conditions, right? But then secondly, on opposition, on our side, and this is going to be our explicit counterfactual, which literally happens in status quo, is that we're going to build shelters within the country. This literally happens in real life, right? It is the state's obligation to be able to protect people, and the difference with stuff like I don't know, genocide refugees versus like the California wildfire is that climate displacement is gradual and can be mitigated through multiple different things. For example, international aid, economic aid, literally anything else that involves having to put these other people into another country that they probably don't fucking know, right? No, that this solves the burden that PM pushes on, which is how these climate migrants which is why these climate migrants would go in the first place. Okay, then continuing on, this leans more towards climate doomerism. We think that is bad. One, the entire mech of seeking asylum means that you have to, which means that you're planning this in the long term, which means that you ought to live in this, ought to live in a society, right? Secondly, if people who suffer the California wildfires move to the east, that sends a signal to more people to move to the east. The long-term impact here is that you get more overcrowding, and we think that is ultimately incredibly harmful, not just for the country that you're going to migrate in, but for these asylum seekers themselves, right? But then I'm going to explain the counterfactual incredibly clearly, as early as coming from LO. What's the difference between having an asylum versus shelter? When you have stuff like climate shelters, which is what happens in status quo, you have stuff like bunker camps within the area, that are instituted by the government or the state with hopes and this idea and this how do I word this out, with like this kind of thing that it's going to improve, that they have to improve, which is why they have these short-term solutions or short-term initiatives in the first place, because the state ought to improve them before that they can leave these bunkers. The difference here then with asylum is that asylum implies you're going to move away and have to actively accept the people who entered into the society. What we ought to aim for is long-term mitigation, which can only be done when you as the government don't tell people to fuck off to another country, right? Okay, but I'm going to explain then, right, on like two things. One, on feasibility, and two, the incentive for change. Climate affects people through proximity, therefore neighboring countries probably face a similar issue, and and therefore your only route is either you're going to have to take the really expensive route where you either fly them off or you make them go to another overcrowded country that's probably facing a similar issue. You probably don't solve anything, right? The impact here is when you have overcrowded countries, you're probably going to deal with stuff like racism. You're going to deal with stuff like the economic drain. All of this is just not going to work out in your favor, right? Countries generally don't want to take these people in the first place, i.e., the stuff like the Ukraine war in the first place, because they don't want too many homeless people. The biggest harm on government is that it's going to be a flood of the system, which is really incredibly slow and bureaucratic. Therefore, it's going to end up being more inefficient for them. And also, countries generally don't have the infrastructure in the first place because if you're going to send them off to like proximate countries, which I assume is what's going to happen on government side, these people are already probably suffer from the same shit. So I don't understand why you have to put them through more when you can literally just have the state incentivize themselves to work better. But then, okay, quickly on the incentive for change. The analysis here is that asylums have people move out with expectation of coming back during war in comparison to leaving, which is through climate, right? The progress with climate change, especially in these countries, are generally so. That's why we have stuff like shelters, which is why we have short-term initiatives until they mitigate the damage to a mitigable and livable extent. Why does this scale off change? One, people who live in asylums who live there for a long time, and a slow move isn't noticeable enough for the government to actually care until it starts impacting their economy. Two, refugees are a constant drain on the economy, which is why people don't want them anyway. We understand all the violence that climate change puts people in, but solving this kind of scarcity means enabling another. Three, asylum is to leave their home and country. No incentive for the government to want them back if they're perfectly fine somewhere else, right? Okay, but then moving on then, on feasibility number 2, and this is going to be the two biggest impacts as to why this is not going to work. One, if it is really true, and let's say it is successful that they put these people into like these places, right? One, these refugees are probably going to face some form of anger or racism against the people around them because climate displacement probably isn't noticeable enough for people to be like, oh my god, oh my god, I can't believe you're moving here, I can't believe you have to move here, right? This means then it sends a signal to the government or to the people in these kinds of like countries that they move to that you're there because you don't want to live in these kinds of conditions, that don't want to live in that kind of weather. What this means then is that these refugees are probably not just going to be labeled as like a bunch of homeless people who didn't want to face their kind of temperature. That also probably means that these people will probably face the kind of racism that happens there, which is why like for example for people in the global south, right, which means then that they probably won't be able to get the better life that PM tells you. I think right off the bat everything that I've told you kind of already mitigates the kind of burden push that PM gives you, and I've never been more prouder to oppose. Thank you and good night.
Okay, we thank the leader of opposition for that speech. Reminder for speakers to please take POIs. Moving on to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, just give me 1 second. I'm gonna take a second.
Hello, is it just me or is the bandwidth for Kinshuk showing to be very low?
Hello, can I be heard now? Is it fine?
There is a sign that says that their network bandwidth is low, but they're audible at the moment. Is this good with the panel as well?
Yep, if they're
Hi.
audible, I have no issues.
Anupriya, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Yes,
Yep,
we can hear you.
audible.
Perfect. I'll take closing opposition. I would love to engage with their extension. Please offer your extension. Please don't hate. Okay, yeah.
Do you want timer? Should I share?
Yes. Please, that would be amazing. Okay. Cool. I want to first observe the language that the leader of opposition uses in their speech. They say things like when these refugees go to other countries, they face things like racism. They face things like problems there because everybody there as well hates them. Note, these are questions and these are problems that also might exist when you allow other kinds of traditional refugees to come into these countries. Refugees, any kind of them, whatever it may be, are not very popular politically in any sense because everybody wants to talk about their own people and their own interests. But note, the 1951 convention tells you that even if there is a harm of this racism or supposed harm of hatred that you might feel from other countries, it is recognized and socially acceptable by the entire human race that some people, when they don't have the ability to sustain their own life, ought to get the right to move from the country, to escape from the state that failed themselves in the first place. It does not matter if there is racism, because the comparative is you living a life that is full of shit, that is full of misery, and that never allows you to be a human in the first place. There are two things I'm going to do in this speech. First, explain why accountability and why accountability is the metric for government, and why this particular policy increases aid in these countries for improving climate change, and why there is more incentive to go ahead and improve climate change within these areas. The first premise of this claim is that the problem in status quo, in the current approach to countries that have the capacity to solve problem with them, is that they do this. Their approach is either A, that is politically more popular, investing in areas that probably gives them more eye clout and media attention and stuff like that, but or in areas that are strategically more important, like selling to EVs, selling EVs at higher prices so that they can exploit the need of these people. Secondly, you want to the other countries, things like you want to trap your own country's carbon using carbon sequestration things and stuff like that, which oftentimes are just insulating you from the harms of climate change, while neglecting the other countries that you systematically oppressed in the process of colonialism, that you systematically have put to an existential threat because of the industrial revolution that happened, which led to so much pollution and which led to so much harms that we see in status quo. Note, they have escaped the cycle of this economic and climatic downturn, but their consequences have led to a harm to these people. Note, this explains why in the current status quo, there is very little political capital to go ahead and spend more money into countries that are affected. Why does this change? The first mech for this is something that opening opposition themselves concede. They themselves concede that most countries do not want refugees because there are huge costs associated with taking care of those refugees, to giving them tents and healthcare and stuff like that within those areas. This means that oftentimes you would want less refugees to come to your own place. This means oftentimes you would want to make preemptive strikes to make sure that the places within those areas become better, because on your decision-making calculus, this is easier to do and less expensive to do for you. More importantly, your own countries push you to do these kinds of things. Your own people, your own masses tell you and call you out when the severity of the problem reaches the masses, because the problem in status quo is that the severity of problem is not reaching the masses within the liberal democracies, because they don't know to what extent people are being persecuted within these areas, because the conflict on their side is contained to deal with. This is absolutely not true on our side of the house, because when the refugee comes knocking at your door, that is when you recognize that there is an active harm. This is visceral to these people, and this visceral reaction creates an incentive and creates a push for people, appeals to their moral intuition that allows them to go ahead and pass more and advocate for more policies. This explains why you are more likely to hold governments more accountable and make sure that there are lesser future harms that exist in developing countries. You are more likely to talk about these things in platforms internationally. These are things that will improve the kind of stuff that happens on their side. On their side, you have zero incentive to do all these things. This explains, and note the implication of this. This argument explains why there will be considerably lesser refugees in future, because the claim is that you are solving the crisis within those areas. Even if this is not true, we just extend the amount of aid on our side because we don't want these people to do that. This is a more certain claim that we claim on our side of the house. This explains why accountability and aid is a metric for governments. The second thing I want to win on is on the principle. And I want to be very clear what the weighing of this principle is. When you're no longer able to live your life as a human. When the state has failed to provide
POI.
these conditions, that is when the society recognizes that you ought to get the right to refugee. No, this analogy is, no, there is zero reputation from our bench to explain why these refugees are less important than the refugees, like the political refugees. We give structural reasons why this is a structural violence that the climate is doing against you, that the state has done against you. The livelihood is destroyed, the property is destroyed, the mental duress. It is, we think there is no difference between a person living in Gaza, constantly scared one day he might die because of bombing, and a person living in a developed country, constantly fearing the wrath of a tornado or the wrath of a flood. CO, do you have a POI?
Even if you make these
It's
migrants
different from political
still have the
refugees
discretion
because this will
them.
political refugees.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't really hear you. So probably it's your it's my internet. But yeah, why is this claim insulated from all consequentialist claims? Note, even if our bench one runs the idea that this will increase right wing, I would first note, anyways, there are other refugees already existing, so this is not the tipping point. More importantly, when we agree that there are fundamental rights that individuals have, we don't suspend them because we fear that some other country might come, some other actor might come up and overturn them. This is literally the reason why we give rights to homosexuals, even though we know that Trump might go ahead and override them, because we want to make a morally right statement as a society. Secondly, note, even if other refugees might be hard, the intuition from here is that just because courts are overburdened doesn't mean that you lock out justice for communities on arbitrary lines. Because we explain, this is even if courts are overburdened, or even if these countries would be overburdened, it is an argument for increasing the capacity of these countries to take in refugees, not an argument for arbitrarily excluding these refugees given that their vulnerability is similar. We explain why the problems are solved on our side, and we explain why they have a principal right to be called a refugee, and we think that they should get the protection. We're so proud to win our opening government.
Okay, we thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Moving on to the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Okay, hello. My name's Miguel. POI preference through voice. If CO and if CG and OG POI at the same time, please assume I will take the POI coming from CO. And if I stop you mid POI, please stop talking. That's enough, Badger. Okay, before I get into my speech, I would like to thank the people who have been training with me, despite how much despite everything. And I'd like to especially thank my partner for agreeing to do a tournament 5 days before the tournament happened during the mid-year season, mid-sem. Okay. Wait, I will set up a timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The benefits that come from opening government, the principal benefits in, you get to give all of these people it's a more shelter, more support, it's a moral good, can only happen in an ideal world in which there's an infinite number of asylum of people that can seek asylum, and that countries have an infinite number that they can accept. Well, what we say on side opposition is that A, there are more important people who need to be prioritized as asylum, and B, that allowing these climate victims to seek asylum is harmful to the government and harmful to their own country, as it incentivizes corruption. Rebuttals will be integrated into my speech. First off, why are political refugees different from an earthquake victim? Please understand, if you look at what's happening to the people in Gaza, the people there are being shot, murdered, raped, killed, and they're being severely oppressed and change is something that will take much, much longer than repairing an earthquake, repairing a house, right? The primary reason on why asylum needs to happen is because it's not just your house that gets gets destroyed, it's your entire country that becomes unsafe to be in, and therefore these people have absolutely no choice but to leave their country and to seek asylum elsewhere. Seeking asylum is already an incredibly difficult process and an already painful process even for these refugees, as often where they seek asylum they are not accepted. Seeking asylum is a last resort, and there is a reason why for 70 years these climate victims have not been eligible for seeking asylum. First, on feasibility. As we've already discussed, countries have a limit on how many people can go there, right? There is, especially, and it is especially because these political refugees need to be prioritized because the longer they stay in their country, the more likely they are to be raped, to be killed by these terrorists, by these warmongers. The thing is, with an earthquake victim, if you make seeking asylum, if you make them ineligible for seeking asylum in a different country, then you keep them within the confines of their own country. This causes governments to be and they can seek shelter through bunkers, through camps, through tents. Meaning, the point is, the difference between a political refugee and a climate refugee is that a climate refugee has other options. They can find shelter. Meanwhile, a political refugee has absolutely no choice but to leave their country. So in the discussion of like, oh, we should let all of these people in, that only works on the idealistic world that government lives in, and realistically, certain priorities need to be made. And when the opportunity cost of being nice to a climate change victim comes at the death of a family in Gaza and the torture of a family in Gaza, we think that that this principled good is not worth what you are losing and the opportunity cost. Why? Second, let's wait. Second, let's talk about the incentive for change. Um, countries the burden of preventing climate change and the burden of the burden of preventing climate change and the burden of making better infrastructure to support these people after these incidents happen is on whichever government is on whichever government is burdened with the victims, because victims are undeniably a burden, and the government wants to rehabilitate them immediately so that they can and so that they're not spending extra money on these resources. On this, they try to opening government tries to address this by saying, oh, because these other countries don't want them, they're gonna work to prevent that. Note, dear panel, that they do not have any analysis. They cannot prove a world in which this. They cannot show. They have not given any clear examples on which this has actually happened, in which refugees moving into a country has incentivized said country to prevent the likelihood of refugees coming in again. Right? All that happens is that these governments they're itching to kick them out, right? They're itching for the other government to actually repair things and to spend money on repairing their infrastructure so that they can send the refugees back to that country. The thing is, right, this only then incentivizes the country in which the climate change and the climate damage actually happened to not repair things, because all that will happen is that, okay, they spent a ton of money repairing this, and for the cost of repairing this, they get back these refugees who will probably take a long time to get a job, who will probably will probably still be a drain. So it ends up being it ends up looking a lot harder. It ends up being a lot less incentivized for these governments to actually focus on preparing their infrastructure. If anything, on the worst case, right, this only looks like governments making infrastructure that's more likely to be damaged, as it's an excuse essentially to kick people out of them. I will take a POI for 3.
Could you please paint a picture of what the average climate migrant looks like and why their life isn't as much worth as a political migrant's?
Okay, the average climate migrant looks like earthquake happened, my house broke down. I might be injured, my family might be injured. People might have died, maybe 10 or 20 people might have died. The numbers are not usually that high. Even for the most devastating earthquakes, the numbers are usually at most 100 or at the absolute worst a few thousand. Have you seen how many people have died in Gaza? Have you seen what's happening to them? They are being these. You're trying to compare my house breaking down to my house being bombed, my child being tortured, my wife being killed in front of me, my body being cut up on live television so that these terrorists can gain political power. Asylum exists to get people out of the country because there's absolutely no other safe place for them. Filling these asylums up with these climate migrants who have so many other options, primarily shelters within their own country, takes away the only hope that these political migrants have. When you side by side opposition, you get better construction and you get better improvement in the country, and most of all, you get to prioritize the people who need asylum, which is already scarce to begin with. All these reasons, very, very proud to oppose.
Okay, we thank the deputy leader of opposition for that speech. That concludes the opening half of this debate. Moving on to the closing half, starting with a member of government.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So before I start my speech, just a shout out to my teammate Shaurya. Sometime back, I was giving a speech to the members of my society, and while I was talking about Shaurya, I talked about him as president. I talked about him as a friend, but I brain fade forgot to talk about him as a debater. Now, with what Shaurya has done, I don't think anybody, not me, not the VIT DevSoc, not the circuit, can forget him. Repeatedly OBS, repeatedly champions finals in every competition. You have made a name for yourself, and I hope you're proud. But everything else you want to hear from me, I will not tell you yet. I will continue to train myself and make me the best version of myself if you also promise to make you the best version of yourself. And those words, I'll tell you, is the day the best version of you beats the best version of me. Cool. I'll begin in 3. Watch timer not needed. I have my own timer. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1, go. Our extension is going to be simple. We're just going to show why the extra legitimacy given by the kind of policy that we propose in this debate is going to lead to much better quality of life for these immigrants and these migrants, and it's going to then sort of outweigh other impacts in this debate. The first thing I want to prove to you is why climate change is going to hit poorer countries the most, and it will coerce them and force them to move out, and they don't have options, unlike what OG says. Notice, OO says, OG says, oh, pollution happens, that's why poor countries bad. Notice that's not really an exclusive mech. Pollution is not unique to developing countries. Increased ozone holes and stuff like that affects everyone, and this is also pointed out, and they don't respond in the POI. What we think really affects these poor countries more is the fact that they largely exist in the tropical regions, and the tropical regions are the most affected by climate change impacts, like hurricanes and sort of heat waves and things like that, because they're closer to the equator. They have more time in the sunlight and heat and things like that, associated problems. They have stronger winds because the pressure differences near the equator leads to hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, and things like that. It leads to more oceans around like these particular coasts and things like that, so flooding and things happen much more frequently in these places, which is why it's going to be probably the developing countries, the poor countries, who are hit much more for this climate change impact compared to the developed countries in the West, who are basically have it much better. This already analyzes to a large degree why there's a need to help these kinds of people, because they're vulnerable, better than OG does, right? But let's continue on this burden and show exactly why this is a coercive decision for them to actually move out in the first place. Notice that, first of all, these are poor countries, which means no matter how many incentives opening opposition wants to give to you, that, oh, make them accountable, oh, force them to do something about it, they simply don't have the capacity to do so, because they don't have the economic strength to be able to build these shelters or to be able to build new industries every time they're destroyed or things like that. Secondly, notice there's every time there's a climate issue, and because the climate issues are going to be continuous and expanding in terms of the intensity over time, because climate change is only going to get worse on their side of the house, means that these things are going to slowly destroy destroy centers of production. Your food crops are going to get much worse off because they're not going to get yield as many crops. Your industries and things on the coast are going to be flooded because of climate change and because of associated problems. The way that you're able to then service your cities and service industries and homes are also going to be impacted severely. The water available to you is going to be much less. The kind of way that you can go in the sunlight and work is much less. The things like skin cancers are going to increase significantly in these countries. This forces you to move out. Notice it's at a point where you're going to abandon your ancestral home. You're going to go to a place that's going to perform racism onto you, and you're still taking these things into consideration to move out. Means it's probably an incredibly coercive choice, and you don't have an option, unlike what opening opposition tells you, right? And finally, it's just like breakdown of government institutions, which means even if they want to do shit, they really can't because people don't believe they can because there's so many problems around them that they see and they don't think government can solve them. This brings me to my second burden to prove, which is why the direction of migration will be towards richer countries. And this is mostly proved by opening opposition already. There's already the perception that you're going to get long-term stability away from the climate issues in these kind of richer countries and things like that. They're going to be able to cater to you. But practically, notice everything opening opposition says maxes out for me. That is, you're not going to go to a place which can't help you in the long run. You're not going to move around like a nomad a lot. You want to settle down because you want a place for your family to grow up. You want a place for your kid to continuously go to school, to make friends and things like that. You're probably going to go and want to go to a country where you can get long-term stability and you're not going to just keep moving around and things like that. Notice then, in California, you're not going to go to a random east state and be poor all your life. You're not going to go to Texas to get different jobs, or going to the East Coast and go get a different job. If you're in the Middle East, you're going to go to Europe and not go to Afghanistan as another example. You're going to go to a place that can accept you, which is why the direction of migration is going to be from poor countries to the richer countries, developed countries and things like that. Then third thing I want to prove to you is then the direction of movement is going to be that side. There are significant barriers to travel, and only asylum eligibility is the tipping point for accessing these destinations that they want to go to, that they can provide for them. For three reasons. A, there's large geographical distances and treacherous biomes like oceans and mountains between them. And on their own, if they try to walk that path, they're going to likely run out of food or water. They're going to be succumbing to lots of diseases. They're going to be attacked by robbers and things like that. They're not going to be able to make it. It'll be really difficult for them. On the comparative, notice what happens when you implement this policy and you legitimize the kind of asylum seekers and things like that. It leads to better collective action on a governmental level, because now there's legal precedent for the UN and the UN Human Rights Commission to act and provide resources, to provide medicine, to provide protection. This is max that OG doesn't give you in showing the diplomatic coercivity of actually implementing this into policy. In the absence of this, you're not going to be able to push responsibility onto countries to be able to help, because then they'll just say, it's not my problem, not my issue, I don't care. The call-out mechanism doesn't exist. The call-out mechanism only exists at a point where you have this policy put into place, and these people are treated equally as much as war, asylum, and things like that. Secondly, the cost of travel is extremely high, ships, planes, things like that, and there's only something you can get on our side of the house, because this legitimacy means that you're going to be largely covered by the UN and things like that, because there's a need for them to do it, because they see it's something that's legitimate. Thirdly, point C, you can notice that you can always be refused at the border of the countries you go to. That means if I put so much effort into going to a particular nation, and then they reject me, all my effort and pains have been gone down the drain, and I'm significantly much more vulnerable at that point. And this is likely to happen because there's low amount of planning, there's random movement on their side of the house, because migration is going any which country that's closest to them, or there's just a sort of movement of monkey follows monkey principle, and people aren't really sort of having a plan, organized thought to it. But countries can also go back on promises, which means if I tell the migrants I will let you in right now, a new government can come in power and change their policy immediately, and then I'm stranded, right? Why does it change in our side of the house? Uniquely because of legitimization. One, because of better migrant organization, since it's a formal legitimate movement across countries that the UN has to cater to, and it's UN responsibility, which means the countries have to accept it, and countries have to legally plan it and make it systematic, which means chances of being rejected are significantly much lower. Secondly, it's much more diplomatically perilous to reject at a point there's a multi-country sort of cooperation to sort of plan and organize things, because uniquely of the legitimacy of this particular transition and migration means you necessarily can't back out very easily unless you want to suffer consequences of being diplomatically isolated and things like that. Even in the US, they do multiple unpopular things that has just hurt them, the global perception across the globe, right? We don't think any country is exempt from this. Finally, what this proves to you as an argument, or that third point, is that the ability for these migrants to even go to a better place, access a better life, uniquely exists only in closing government, because we show the delta uniquely only because of the mechanisms we have given you, right? But then fourth thing I want to prove to you is after immigration, they would live a difficult life, and legitimacy through asylum is the only way to mitigate this, right? And the reason is simple. OG says it's just because, oh, I will appeal to humanity. This is not a real argument, because even illegal immigrants and things like that still face similar issues, and you can have an appeal to humanity like that. What really is a difference is the associated legitimacy that comes across with this motion, right? What notice is that we get more moderates on our side of the house because we're able to appeal to them to the idea this is an international phenomenon. It's not just the US who's taking more immigrants, it's France, it's UK, it's Germany. We're not alone to this, which means more acceptable for you because you're not the only one suffering. B, you see them equally as war refugees because of the rhetoric and advertisements and propaganda around it, because it's legally and sort of legitimately seen them as equal. And thirdly, it noticed that there are already models that exist in the status quo about successful integration of migrants into society, like in Europe and things like that, right? What this means is moderates see that it is justified to take them in, but also we have the ability to take them in. They're going to support pro-immigration politicians, which will implement good policies, security, funding, which protects the lives of the immigrants who are the most vulnerable actors in this debate. For those reasons, vote side closing government.
Okay, we thank the member of government for that speech. Reminder for participants that you're only allowed to raise POIs between the first minute and the 6th minute. If OC could screen share a timer if ever it is needed, that would be great. But I also do recommend people keep their own time as well. Moving on to the member of opposition.
I'll just take 10 seconds. Till then, I'll be recording my speech. So any POI will be recorded. If any of the gov teams don't consent, please let me know. I'll wait for like 10 seconds till I prepare my notes.
Can it shift to a stopwatch, please?
Cool. Seeing no objections, we'll be recording my speech then. Just give me 5 seconds to turn it on. Cool. Aryan Gurav, member of opposition. Before going ahead, a few shout outs. Thank you to Manan for teaming up with me. Really struggling for teammates these days. Really helpful. Thankful for Raj for not letting me quit debating every time I did not break, which is extremely high amount of number. To my juniors who keep making sure that they are so good that I have to be better to teach them things. With that being said, ready to start in 3, 2, 1. Oh, at best proves to you 2 things. One, that climate migration is undesirable and will face problems in other countries. What we'll do is that we'll prove to you that this policy or this proposal is so outrageously harmful that this in first place should not exist and this option in its place should not exist. Before that, taking out OG because that's the easiest thing to do in this debate. One, OG's entire case is, oh, accountability is necessary, and their entire case is that nobody wants migrants. So if you inherently bring this policy, people will automatically preemptively solve issues. 2 things: you can allow these migrants to go places, but these countries don't have any sort of compulsion to take them in. Sure, there is a moral duty to take in things, but I wish moral duties made people do things that they don't want to do. Therefore, I'm really unsure as to why simply making these migrants eligible under the 1951 statute is going to force countries to take in these peoples when they have to do. Even if they do that, I'm very unlikely to believe that just to avoid future migrants coming to my country in a future earthquake, I'm going to go into countries like Mexico and India and invest in their anti-climate change policies, right? Their case is speculative at best and therefore never ever counts in this debate. Proving and giving you an extension. Panel, please note, it is extremely hard to identify what causes real climate change harm. Do you amount melting of ice as climate change harm? Do you amount 3 degrees rise in temperature in Mexico as climate change harm? Do you amount one earthquake which occurs every 4 days in Japan as a climate change harm? Note, it is extremely hard to characterize what is the event that can trigger people moving out of this country. And for all those reasons, we buy Arch's characterization and we tell you that these people and these events are largely happening in poor and underdeveloped countries. Therefore, every single chance that you get to move to a developed country without documentation, you will pounce on that chance. Even if you are unaffected by the cyclone or that earthquake, what happens then? We tell you that there is already a large fascination to moving to these Western countries, and that is why this policy is shitty, right? We tell you 2 things. One, these people are going to grab a chance to move out of their country, even if they're not harmed by the calamity that happened in their world. They are going to take this chance to move out of their country, wipe their criminal record in this country, possibly move out to another country without any documents, have a prettier life there. Some racism is fine, things like that. That's why we believe you allow people to randomly move. There is no clear mechanism when it comes to migrants. And because they're quote unquote migrants, you never really go in depth, check their criminal history, things like that. And therefore, you move people without any need. But what does this actually lead to? It leads to three things. It causes social harm to the host country. People go mad. Like white people, when seeing Mexican people move into their country, start protesting in their own country. Like, why are these random people coming to my country? I know it's wrong, but it still happens. Secondly, they create economic efforts on the local countries things, which means sure, and America would be able to take more and more people, but a strategically placed country like India, if starts getting more and more migrants from Bangladesh and Pakistan, is not going to be able to handle those things because we are already fucked up in our sense. But lastly and most importantly, and this is something that O never tells you, we tell you that these migrants now, because are moving to other countries, they are going to put some sort of environmental burden on these countries because you have to probably travel there, you have to sit, spend there, which means the environment of those local countries is also going to be problematic and something that it's something that also adds to the issue. Now, getting to the contention that opening bench engage and get into a rabbit hole, which was never really worth their 7 minutes. Please note that all these things fucks it up for other migrants. Please note that when these people come into your country and you figure out that, oh, they were never really affected actually in the first place, the image of migrants inherently, which is already bad, gets even worse. And therefore, you have movements and riots and protests that I earlier talked about, which are happening all over Europe and America currently. But secondly, you have very limited capacity of taking people, which means if you take these people, the issue that you have now is that you can't take other sorts of people and other sorts of migrants or climate migrants themselves from other countries who may genuinely have suffered are not able to come in and stay in your country. Now, while way by political migrants are sort of more important to us than climate migrants, note an earthquake in a city in India still leaves rest of India habitable, which means you can probably still go out and live in the rest of your country. If you have a cyclone in one coast of your country, go and live or have migration in other state of your country. We believe you are much more likely to blend there. We believe you are much more likely to get health, jobs, education, etc. in your own country because first, it's cheaper to travel in your own country. You don't have to go through jungles or ships or don't get seasick on ships, right? Therefore, you can still go to other countries. But moving out difficulty is easy for you because you have state-sponsored helicopters, planes, ships to carry you out. Why do we believe political migrants don't get all this? They are hurt in their country politically, which means they have to leave out of their country or they're fucked up. We believe that if you take climate migrants who have multiple other options, we believe that you actually cost out on political migrants. Why is this bad and why is this policy active harm, right? One, note, we buy OG's framing that larger countries need to come in and sort climate change, but we believe their policy is not the way to do it. We believe that the moment in time these countries take in few migrants, they raise their hands and they say that, oh, we took 500 migrants yesterday. That's our contribution to climate change. We help people who are suffering from climate change. And that is why we are not going to do anything else. And we tell you that is bad because you take 500 migrants and you never really actively engage in solving the issues that exist in climate change. We know that these larger countries simply want to make profit. They would rather do the bare minimum, like America always does, and claim that we are the leaders of the world. That's why when you give them an easy walkout to say that take these migrants and then you will be done with your environment saving or climate change mitigation duties, we believe that's not a good idea because then they are never able to actually go ahead and invest in areas which matter. They are only helping in moving migrants from one place to another and never actually preventing the reason that caused the migrants to leave. We tell you that this policy will have extreme misuse because people, by Archit's characterization, are very likely and very desperate to move out of their own country and they will pounce on every chance they get to move out of there for free with a guaranteed house in their desired country with a flight to go there without any documents. And this creates a fuss for other sort of political or other climate change migrants. But lastly, we tell you that these countries, they have a easy way out of their climate change mitigation duties, and they never really contribute to solving real migrant change. We actually solve environment in environment debate, and for all those reasons, we take this debate. Thank you.
Okay, we thank the member of opposition for that speech. Moving on to the government whip.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Cool. 1 second. All right, sure, you're going as GovWeb. I'll take a POI from opening. Please don't unmute yourself. Just put it in the chat. I will take one anyways. Before starting, thank you, Archit. It really means a lot. Lots of more tournaments to do. See you around. Thank you, VIT Dapsok. All right, I'll start on my first word. On closing government, we do not trade lives. We do not think that one life is more valuable than the other. And we're going to prove, in the simplest of terms, why vulnerable people who have the capacity to access migration are best off only when we offer them this legitimacy. So proud to propose. I want to take out opening opposition, because their only case, and this extends to closing opposition, is just that political migrants and people who need this are unable to access it. Two responses to this. I think individuals die on both sides by their own characterization. Earthquakes happen, people's like homes get flooded, there are torrential rains. These are unpredictable outcomes that you have no control over, which means that people suffer diametrically on the same level on both sides. We don't think that any one person suffering, like maybe it's different in context, but people end up suffering is the main crux of this idea, right? But notice the context or the capacity for these political refugees to move is already significantly low. This is due to things like literal war happening, which means that there are fewer means of transportation that exist for these people to access. There is broken down infrastructure. You can't just fly in people and fly them out. There is greater danger to these individuals when they try to leave, because there are more threats near places which are near threats in places such as roads, such as airports and stuff like that, because this is where like armies and stuff usually end up settling, and where all of their supplies are base, which means just the political refugees to be able to leave their country is significantly high. If they have the option to migrate, unfortunately, this happens on extremely lower scales. That's why a lot of people in Gaza are stuck in Gaza and cannot move. This is not because other countries are shunning them out. Countries want to help them. It's just that they're unable to find ways to leave until a peace treaty is brokered, which means that if these people migrate, sure, you can give them priority. Unfortunately, it just happens on too little of a scale for it to be actually useful to anyone. We can still co-opt all of that. You can still get the benefits of moving climate migrants in the first place. The next idea they have is that you need accountability from states to fix this. I would posit that accountability is quite symmetric because external pressures still exist. By their own characterization, if these individuals got such a high burden that these countries in which do they move to are also constantly pressurizing this internal state to fix their infrastructure, to fix climate change and make sure that they're able to develop the capacity or develop more shelter in which they can house these individuals. Internal pressure also exists because notice these aren't people who are freely leaving their countries. These aren't economic migrants that are moving for like, a better job opportunity. These are individuals who had their own communities and their own sources of livelihood tied down within these places, and they were forced to leave by an act of God, which means internal pressure from other family members who have now seen their family being flown out of their country want them to come back, which means pressure exists pretty symmetrically on both sides. If accountability is the only thing opening opposition has, we can prove that there is no real exclusive benefit of them living in terrible conditions in their own home country, and that they're much better off seeking asylum better off, right? This next point of rebuttal engages also directly with closing opposition, because the idea is just that you can stay within your own country. Like, well, obviously, if you had put it in the chat, if you had the possibility to stay within your own country, you would have obviously chosen to do so. The barrier to migration is necessarily high. You have to depart from your community. You have to depart from places that you have grown up. There is nostalgic value that you have incurred in this place. There is cultural ties. There are just like a lot of like your assets are tied down into these places. You can't or you don't willfully choose to move in the first place, which means that if there were shelters within their country where you could be housed, you would obviously go to those places first. If there were other places within the country that you could safely move to, you obviously would have tried that as your first attempt. Unfortunately, the people who end up being climate migrants are the most vulnerable individuals who don't have access to these opportunities and are thus forced to rely on these on migration and things like that, right? The last piece of the rebuttal that I have for opposition bench is just this idea that people will randomly move and you can shift to other places, right? Notice this motion literally states that it makes you eligible for refuge. It doesn't mean that you are mandated, or like countries are mandated to take you as refugees forever, which means that if there are possibilities for you to relocate, if the extent of harms that you're facing as a result of this climate change is not severe, then your migration application can just be rejected. I'm unsure as to why that even is a claim, right? What then is our positive material, and why does this become the most important within this debate, right? We're able to prove the legitimacy of these individuals necessarily becomes the tipping point to get more support and make sure these people access better lives. OG trades off the quality of life of these migrants by saying that, oh, it's okay if they suffer through racism because at least we will solve climate change. Notice they're never able to prove the efficiency or like any long-term tangible impact of climate change actually being solved. I'm unsure as to why so many countries are able to redirect resources. This technology or whatever they end up using is extremely speculative and extremely long-term in the future. We aren't sure if or the benefits on opening government actually happen. We prove a better burden. We prove why the lives that these individuals end up living is going to be significantly better. There are three reasons for this. The first is just that migration does not happen alone. If a city has been flooded and your house is one of the unfortunate ones, you aren't the only person that is now being migrated to. Your entire community and your locality moves as well. Migration happens en masse, which means you can still access things like culture and stuff like that. When you are in this refugee or like main country, you aren't being segregated. You're more likely being kept together just because it's easier for administrative reasons to make sure that they can monitor everything that's going on. But notice, you're not just going to US, UK, and France and all of these countries. You're also going to countries like Ireland and Iceland and Greece, which are slowing economies that would absolutely love this additional influx of more manpower that is able to generate their factories and generate more income for them, right? This allows you to access things like jobs, allows you to access things like basic amenities. OG just asserts that this will
POI.
happen. We give you the mechs to prove why these people have the capacity to live good lives. Opening opposition.
There's a limit to the number of people that a country can take for asylum.
That's enough. I've already dealt with that. Not going to engage again. What then are we able to prove? Just the fact that through contact theory, through just living in these places in like over time, just because you interact with more people, you're able to gradually build up relationships. People are slowly likely to be empathetic to you and all of these things. It is a certain impact that these individuals who do end up migrating live better lives and who live better lives, right? These are vulnerable people. You want to care about them. Notice in the absence of this legitimacy, these people suffer. They're not allowed to move to different countries, which means that there are other factions of like narratives that make sure that these people are not able to enter. There are just like other narratives and people's proximity bias, which doesn't allow them to associate with all of these things, which means that the messaging only crucially changes when you offer legitimacy towards these refugees. This looks like corporations who are now able and forced to send aid. This looks like countries and your own national organizations that pressure you and other nations to also take up these refugees because you don't want to be the only person that suffers as a result of this. We think more individuals and just more eyes fall on this, more eyes and more organizations end up coming to work in helping these people move. You end up making sure that these people move to safer shelters and in good manners. You reduce their suffering within their home country, and you enable and empower them to live significantly better lives once they migrate. You lock out all of these benefits when you shun them just like any other refugee. So proud to propose.
Okay, we thank the government whip for that speech to conclude this debate. Calling on the opposition whip.
Am I clearly audible?
Yes.
Cool. A quick round of shout outs before I go ahead with my speech. Thank you, Thank you, Aryan, for teaming up with me. This is really good. And we just randomly decided one day, like, let's maybe do Modo, and then Modo Edge closed. Then we were like, let's do RBPD. Thanks to OC for a really good comp. Lastly, thank you, IIT Bombay DevSoc. Thank you, Vishwan Pranjal. And thank you to my coach. That being said, uh, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. notice panel that CG case is just that you were able to make this more accessible. If I'm able to prove to you that like the migration leads to worse outcomes and it is inherently a harm, I think accessibility just all of the accessibility mech just plays into our just we prove. So insofar as the clashes, if this leads to good outcomes or not, and insofar as CEO was able to beat out CG in proving that this leads to bad outcomes, I think we way over both OG and CG. But then let's take OG out of the debate because they say that just because you're vulnerable, you should everybody should do something for you and everybody should start taking in refugees. By that logic, I believe that everybody should open borders because there are always developing countries that do not have a good regulation and that do not have good political leaders. There are always people that are being killed even without wars because these political leaders are not good. By that logic, all borders should be open. That does not happen. But then secondly, they just say that people resort to climate refugees in the worst case, and this is something that CG also tries to mechanize. I believe this is inherently untrue because by their own frame, if these people are struggling so much, they literally have just more proximate incentives than just the love for their country or the inertia to move. I believe that if poor people are able to get better policies and able to get better welfare and living conditions, I believe they'll always be willing to go. This looks like if India opens the borders to a country like Bangladesh, if they believe that you're getting good refugee conditions, which is what CG is trying to make, that just because this is legitimate, people would give you good conditions to live in. I believe a huge amount of people will move into the country, and this inherently inherently plays into all of the mechs that we give you because this just means that the debt and we will prove to you why due to this delta and due to this amount of people moving in, the environment just gets worse off even in this country that you are moving into, and create a cascading harms where you were trying to do this because you wanted to protect the environment and you end up doing the exact opposite. I believe the opening I believe the opening falls into this rabbit hole on how this is different from political refugees. I believe the answer is very very simple because this will happen on a massive scale. Political refugees are different because you need a war for that, and at any point in time, let's say only 2 wars are going on, which means that you have refugees from only 2 places. But political refugees are also reversible when the war ends and you are able to get good government ties. I think people will move back to the. This is irreversible because this is going to be if this started because the temperature went up by 3 degrees, I do not think the temperature is going to go down by those 3 degrees, and so this becomes irreversible. But this just happens because a massive on scale because this is literally a blanket thing that will happen. So any developing country that is able to say that I'm facing a lot of climate change and I'm facing by Archit's own analysis, these developing countries will always face a lot of climate change in the future because that is just how climate is in status quo, which just becomes that it is very easy for any country to be able to say that we are fucked and so let our refugees coming, and it is very easy for refugees to be also able to do that, which just means that this is going to be really really bad. But even if you don't buy all of this, I believe, and if you want to buy the rebuttal coming from CG saying that it just means that there's eligibility, you may not be willing to do this. I believe that goes against their own analysis when they say that this is a legitimate international order, which means that maybe you will always be forced to take people in once this is put as an international policy. But even if you don't buy that, I'm okay to take the trade-off with something that we're able to do. We'll prove why we're ready to let's say maybe fuck over a few of these vulnerable people because we believe that the comparative is worse. Okay, what is the extension that they give you? We prove to you that why the environment is going to be worse off. It does this in a way. Says that the refugees are just bad and they do very very general analysis. We're able to prove to you that why the refugees have higher chances to moving and why the scale is really, really high where you're able to reach the tipping point. Doesn't reach the tipping point. Is never able to tell you why everybody would be willing to move, and we firstly tell you that, but then we secondly tell you why the delta is not going to be big because in this response to CG, because if you're moving to a neighboring country because all you can do because you do not have a lot of capacity as a poor person to travel a lot, this neighboring country would also have the same kind of frame that CG is trying to set up of how you are in this tropical belt where there's a lot of climate. You still are maybe close with motion, and so you will still face the same talk. Not going to change to a very. If your initial country was so susceptible to these environmental harms, your new country that you moved to are also going to be susceptible. Then why was the new country still not facing the climate change harms to a good extent? Because maybe the country was maybe a bit developed, has better resources, and had better regulation to be able to control their population and say that you need to follow these environmental policies. Why is that fucked over, and why are we the only house that is able to claim exclusive like delta from this debate, where we are able to prove to you that the environmental harm is the only thing that changed? Maybe political harms are something that exists on both sides, and that is why political harms of refugees, the environmental harms, and what is the illustration of this? We're able to prove to you that if more people come in, you will more infrastructure, that there will be more construction and more trees being cut. But these people are literally poor, and so they'll not have a lot of money, so they'll likely just cut wood and stay, or like build huts, or even if not, they'll cut wood and like cook food using that gas. But then thirdly, the reason your climate of this developed country was doing well was because they had some regulation and they were able to like keep this regulation. But just so many people and so many people moving in it with such a great influx means that there are more people and it becomes difficult to like impose regulation. But then secondly, these are refugees, and so you cannot just hold them to laws. People new to the country and they're completely fucked off your environmental laws, which means that if the weighing on all gov benches is that they are vulnerable and they are facing a lot of harms from climate change, I believe this gets even more fucked over, because we believe that now even the countries that were able to do well in terms of climate and in terms of environment, they keep getting over, and now they will go bad. Why we're able to prove why we were able to reach the tipping point, because the number of people coming in would be very, very massive. This just flips all of the vulnerability flame on OG and CG, something that O is never able to prove. Then the weighing on the environmental harm is very, very simple. The government is never able to say with certainty that the country from which the refugees will be able to do well. O works on an assumption that the country will do reparations. We don't work on an assumption. We prove to you why it's uncertain, and so most likely the country, if it was poor, will do nothing about the environment, even if refugees leave the country. But then secondly, flocking of refugees into these new countries is going to cause environmental harms on this new country. The tipping point is easy to prove, because we prove to you that they are in the same kind of vulnerability belt, which means that even they are facing a lot of environmental harms. So because we are able to prove to you that they are vulnerable, and we prove how these people will fuck over a lot of the environmental laws, and we will need new infrastructure which is bad for the environment. And so this tips over and causes environmental harm, where you also fall into the same climate change harm. And thirdly, this is irreversible because this is environment. And so the weighing should be very, very clear in environmental motion. If some countries are fucked over already, let them stay fucked over, because you can do nothing about them. At least try to save the countries that are not facing climate change to a great extent. At least try to save the calamities that are not happening, and countries that are able to stay like carbon neutral and stuff like that. You fuck those countries over too. The poorer countries already do nothing about it. So environment is just radically worse off on CO, and that is the only certain harm that we're able to prove. For all those reasons, CO has a certain harm. Votes.
Okay. We think opposition worked for that speech. We thank all teams for what is a wonderful debate.